Well, 13,000 people's watched this last one in 5 days, and it's just getting going. So you've got a lot to offer.
Oh, I don't know about that.
Wisdom.
Oh, I don't know about that.
You've had enough time to turn knowledge into wisdom.
I wish you knew some of them old railroad hands, though. They worked. They done got old, past 70 years old, but they still wanted to work. Uncle John Moody beat him out of 15 years, he said. And there was McManus. He was old. And back during the Depression, he told me he had his money, what he had, in a money belt, and his wife wore it. He lived up here on Hillsborough. Lived up there about the other side of that rental store there on the left. And she wore the money, carried the money. She wore
all
that,
of it?
Whatever he had it in that money belt. Yeah.
Now that's not trusting a bank.
No, them banks are going broke everywhere. Yeah. They're shutting them down. People lost everything they had. Them banks.
Yeah. And I guess you couldn't leave it at your house.
Well, it's safer. She didn't. He was a peculiar old fella. So he carried with it what his wife carried it.
Right.
Yeah. Worked every day. There was a bunch of them. They wouldn't lay off for nothing. Bobby Hall would force them off. When they got 3,800 miles, they're supposed to come in on them out-of-town jobs and replace them. They wouldn't come in if it didn't make them. No, they'd work right on through. Now they get 3,800. It was working 16 hours a day. 16 hours, man, that was a long time.
That's long.
That's what the hog law was, 16 hours. Couldn't work over that. We'd work and get
then
caught.
You had to get somewhere to go to sleep. You had to find somewhere to lay down after 16.
We had to shut it down wherever we was when 16 hours hit. They'd send another crew, get the train, carry it on.
You know, in the Depression, I know you don't like to talk about it much.
Well, I don't know much about it. I was a young fella, but I worked with some men that went through the Depression. And for instance, Jim McClung, he lived here in El Dorado. He was an engineer for Rock Island. Had a wife and 2 kids. Well, he couldn't find any work, but he could ride the railroad. He could ride the freights. And he worked from Ogden, Utah to Kansas. He went out in Kansas one time for wheat harvest. Well, that wasn't good for long, and he got out there late. So clerk told him that they wouldn't be able to work him. So he went in this big chalkboard on the wall about 6-7 foot high with all the crews. So he marked himself up on the extra board. He worked 2 weeks before they caught him. Yeah. He told me that they was digging up a pipeline over here at Line Oil at the front gate. And said there was 200 men out there to try to go to work. They wasn't digging it up with no backhoe or trackhoe or nothing, digging it up with shovels. And they was going to hire 50 men. Well, this fella's up on the trailer with them lace-up boots on. He said Roosevelt's overcoat wouldn't have made him a vest. Said he'd pick out a big man over there, and they'd all try to get on the trailer. They'd throw them all off except the one he wanted. They'd start again. Said he knew he didn't have a chance as Jim McClung. So he said he knew where they was going to start to work at. So he made his way around there and got him a shovel and went to work. Here come foreman or somebody and said, "Did I hire you?" "Yeah, you hired me." Said he was digging just hard as he could go. Said, well, he said, "Somebody's got to go. There's one too many." But things was desperate for work. And I was thinking about old Brantley Vernon. You know, he was my Sunday school teacher. He was down in Banyan and here in El Dorado. He was working out at Root Refinery. That's where Clean Harbor is now. Well, he got laid off. He lived over on Pecan Street. So his wife told him, said, "Brantley, you got to get out of here." And he done laid around 4 or 5 days. Said, "You got to go to work." Well, he said, "There ain't no work. Ain't nothing I do." Said, I'm packing your lunch. In the morning, said, you going to work. Got up, got his lunch. Said he didn't know anything else to do, but said, go back out there to Root Refinery and work with the crew that he'd been working with. And he worked with them, and superintendent come by and said, Brian, they said, we had to lay you off, don't you remember? Yeah, I said, I just didn't have nothing else to do. Said, I just come out here. So he worked till he retired. They kept him on. He retired from an old Root Refinery, maybe it's American Oil by then. But the Lord took care of him, blessed him.
That's what I hear the most is jobs.
Yeah.
Jobs.
There wasn't any. There was nothing to do. But you take them old railroad men. I went to work at Line Chemical. It paid $1.35 an hour. That in 1950. I'd been all right if I hadn't bought a new car, just got married, bought a new Ford car, bought furniture down at the Elevator Furniture. And let's see, what else I buy? Paying house rent. I couldn't hardly make it. But I finally got and they was charging me 10% interest. So I got that, went to the bank. The regular rate was 4%. I got it cut down to 4%. Well, that helped a bunch right there. But I shouldn't have ever bought that much furniture. I mean, Ruby was just picking out what we wanted, like we had money. But anyway, then I got laid off out there in 55, I think it was. Went to work the railroad. Well, I stayed on the extra board 12 years. And them old men that had been there had come up through the Depression. They worked every day they could work, looking for another Depression, I guess. And men, Ralph Milligan, all of us younger fellas, we just worked when they'd force them off at 3,800 miles. They'd have to, but by the end of the month, they didn't have enough of us to replace them. So they'd work straight on through. And, but
filling up their sack, like you tell me.
Uncle John Moody told me he beat him out of 15 years. They're supposed to quit at 70. He had a hernia. He wore 2 suits of clothes. If it was a damp day, he'd wear a slicker suit. Couldn't hardly get up on the engine. But he said it just comes just right. He was 85 when they finally got him off there. He got him an old family Bible. And he said he beat him out of 15 years. But he said that throttle on that engine would come just right, that he could work it. He couldn't sweep a floor at home or wash a dish, but he could run that engine all day long. But engineers wanted to go to a 5-day work week, gonna pay him for 6. Uncle John didn't want to do that. He said if he didn't want to work 6, he'd lay off. He wouldn't do it. But they did anyway. They finally forced him into it.
You know, grandmother, she was, the Depression must have been hard on them because she collected shoes, clothes, forever.
And he's got a stack of them in there now, hundreds of pair.
I'm serious, hundreds of pairs of shoes piled up, taller than me probably.
I'll give the church about 100 pair of sandals, big box full. But she just liked shoes. We'd go
Did she not have any growing up?
Not many. No, maybe one pair. Went to school. She didn't have a $33. She went to Tech. Never did come back home. I don't think. She worked. She lived with a dietitian, and she worked in the lunchroom, taking up tickets or numbers for those who's eating there at Tech. They had school 7. Well, it was a full year. They went the military. A bunch of men was going through the military in 40. That was about. She graduated in 48, I believe. But they had school. She graduated in 2 years and 10 months, but she didn't have any money to go back home, and Bernice wasn't very far from Ruston, but that's the way it was. But she hung in there. But yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm gonna change the subject off the Great Depression, and maybe we'll get back to it. But you know, you were a business owner. You were just so everybody knows, he had a trucking company. He had a salvage yard with wreckers, big wreckers too, two big ones for 18-wheelers.
Yeah.
And how did you get into that? How was how did you become a businessman coming out of the railroad? You know?
Well, I'd bought one old truck, and it was what they called a half cab and a flatbed trailer, and was hauling lumber, green lumber, to Shreveport and Little Rock, and Porsche lumber company. Anyway, and I sold Wade half interest in it, and we was hauling concrete piling. He was in the business of concrete business, and we got into hauling pre-stressed concrete, and it worked out good. The Lord blessed us in that. We wound up with 50 trucks with Great Lakes Chemical, and that was a blessing there. And then we put in this salvage yard, big truck salvage, on 15 there, and I liked it because we sold the trucking business and done good. And the Leaseway is a major company there. We bought that 40 acres down there on 15 by Great Lakes Chemical, and we started this salvage yard, and it was very good. We had quite a few people working, and it worked out. Close the door at 5 o'clock and go home. You didn't have to worry about somebody calling you broke down or whatever. And it was a good business, salvage business. We rebuilt transmissions, rear ends, engines, done all of it, and had a shop that we done mechanicing in. And the wreckers brought in the broken down trucks. We had 3 little wreckers and 2 big ones. And it was a good business. The Lord blessed us in that. Yeah. So that was a good thing.
Yeah, it was. That was. It's hard to get from. Well, so when did you retire from the railroad? Did you just decide to quit?
I quit before they did. They Rock Island went out of business, but I'd quit already before that, and so I had to on account of the trucking business has grown so much at that time. So
you were working a full-time job and doing the trucking business.
Yeah, there for a while. That wasn't working out too good either. But anyway, I finally quit the railroad after 22 years.
That's a long time.
I like to starve to death on the railroad now. The railroad, I was making $1.35 at chemical plant. Railroad paid for average 100-mile day, they'd pay $8. That was in 1950, well, 51. I was in 55, I went to the railroad. They still wasn't paying very good. Switch engine paid $10 a day. But if you went to Alexandria, that's 150 miles each way, done a little better. But we would, if you drawed in the unemployment, it would pay $50 a week if you wasn't working. But if you worked any, they took out $10 for every day you worked. So that you didn't get $50. You got, if you worked a day or two, well, it'd come off of it. But anyway, but the Lord blessed, and it was, I don't know much about depression though, but I do remember going down and watch Dad and them unloading gondola cars, railroad cars with shovels, and it wasn't no backhoe or track hoe. They had to do it with a shovel, and that was.
And they were glad to do it.
Oh yeah, they was making WPA. Well, they was paying about $37 a month. That's about 17 cents an hour, I think. At best I remember, but it wasn't very good. But but people was glad to work at that. If I knew more about the Lord, I could have done better. We got in this salvage business, and I was thinking about Jerry Pirtle was he worked for Evers Electric. He was an engineer, or he figured the jobs for one thing. Well, anyway, he come down to the shop. We kept our Bibles, the Gideon Bibles, in his office. In his office, 1 by 12 by 16. And he said those Bibles, he come down to the shop one day and told me, because we'd go up there, and I'd been seeing him. I'd go up there and pick up Bibles and bring back some. He said the presence of those Bibles convicted him, and Randy Evers won him to the Lord. Well, I knew the Word of God was, Hebrews 4:12 said the Word of God is alive and powerful and sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing even to the dividing of soul and spirit and joints and mire, and is a discerner of the thoughts and intents of the heart. I knew it was powerful, but I didn't know his Word was alive. And he told me that the presence of those Bibles, he had to look at them 8 hours every day, doing this estimating. And it convicted him. And Randy Evers went in to witness to him. Said, Jerry, you going to church any? No, I said, ain't nothing but hypocrites down there. He said he was kind of a hippie character then. He said, well, Jerry, where do you think Satan's working at? Down at Rancher's Beer Joint or at the church? Well, he said he figured they already got him down to Rancher's Beer Joint. He's working on the church. Anyway, he asked the Lord to come into his heart and save him. And he's been a dedicated Christian man ever since. And Randy's been blessed. He's kept these Gideon Bibles out there for 50 years. I thought I was going to get to keep them. One day, Monroe Hill, accidentally, a preacher, was a mechanic for him, accidentally burned the shop down, the parts room, all the upstairs where he held the classes for the electricians, and we had 5,000 Gideon Bibles up there. Well, I went over there that day and it's on fire. And they finally got it put out. So I decided I'd go back the next day and see if I could salvage any of those Bibles. They had to get the fire department back out there the next day to put the Bibles out again. They were still burning. But anyway, the adjuster, I talked to him, he said, if you get me a figure on the value of what those Bibles cost was, I'll get you a check. So I called Arthur Hawkins. He kept up with the Bibles down to the last one. Arthur figured it all up, and I brought it out there to Randy the next day. Randy said, oh, they might be 2 or 3 months paying that. Said, I'll just pay it myself. So he wrote a check to the Gideons for the full amount of those Bibles. Well, I thought to myself, maybe I can keep them out the house since he don't have any place. So I told him, I said, I got a good place out in my house shop there. Keep those Bibles. Well, he said, let's go over here across the way next to my office. Said, I got a place that might be just right. Sure enough, he had a place. He didn't want to keep them. He was like Obed-Edom keeping the Ark of the Covenant. He didn't want to give up those Bibles. He kept them, and he still got them. And but the Lord blessed him tremendously for it. Yeah.